landlords basically at this point are, losing money, can't get tenants out, losing deals on even selling the property. They're not able to sell the properties because of tenants. They're not able to show properties. Tenants are ruining properties. We can't get them evicted, can't get payments. It's an absolute mess.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for a brand new episode of the DC Talks podcast. We're back in the DC headquarters today to talk about the landlord-tenant board. This is a very, very touchy topic. A lot of landlords these days are struggling to evict people. The whole process is a mess. But before we get into that, DC, how you doing today, man?
We're saying a little busy a little busy. Yeah. Like this before March break, it always gets busy. The family, we like to go away. Like it's just right
Spring
before it's a lot of things happening right now.
Yeah.
Lots of listings coming up,
Yeah.
listings kind of staying a little stagnant because usually before the spring market, this happens. People wait to see. We got the Bank of Canada. At the time of this recording, the tariffs may or may not take effect. I don't think it's going to take effect. What's the date today? Today is March 5th. So the day of this recording, I don't think the tariff's going to come through, and I don't think it's going to have an impact like everybody's saying, but that's me. Let's see what happens.
Let's get into it.
I think people just get scared.
People are scared, and this is like the topic of conversation, but we know like the main culprit, all the things that happened to get to this point.
And it's not all Trump's fault.
It's not Trump's fault. But to get to the main topic of the day, right? When you talk to landlord these days, like what's the number one frustration?
You're talking to a landlord.
I know. But other landlords, right? What's one frustration you hear about that's they're dealing with tenants?
So I have a number of clients who are landlords as well. There's been a couple that have tenants that aren't paying.
Yeah.
So there's no way of getting a tenant out. The tenants have all the rights now. This is the problem with the landlord-tenant board, right? The landlord-tenant board was, I think it was 2007, January 31st, 2007, that it came into effect. And the reason why the landlord-tenant board here in Ontario came into effect is, we get it, the landlords were taking advantage of the tenants, and there was no way to protect them to the tenants, and there was no rights, etc. So the landlord-tenant board was created. It was supposed to be more mutually agreeable on both sides. Now, unfortunately, the pendulum has swung so far in the favor of the tenants that landlords basically at this point are, losing money, can't get tenants out, losing deals on even selling the property. They're not able to sell the properties because of tenants. They're not able to show properties. Tenants are ruining properties. We can't get them evicted, can't get payments. It's an absolute mess. Like one of my clients right now, the tenant's in arrears by $25,000. And we have filed for the landlord-tenant board. And here's what also grinds my gears a little bit about the landlord-tenant board. If you don't fill out the paperwork and maybe you're off by a day, instead of them saying, hey, just correct this, they throw out your application. You have to start all over again. So you can go through, and it already takes like 6 months or so to get a tenant, even get in front of like a hearing. You might go through this whole process like, what's going on? Like, oh, sometimes don't even tell you there was a mistake. They just toss out your application. You have to start all over again. So that's why they always say like, when you're doing an application, right? Like when you're doing like a lease, it's always good to do like the first of the month. So that way, So for example, one of my tenants, she included the day she put the application in as the number of days, and it was off instead of 15, or whatever, instead of, I think it was 65 days, she put 66 and they tossed it out.
And they didn't even tell her.
They didn't even tell her. They had to find out. And the point is it's causing lots and lots of issues. So that I just gave you an overview, but we can get into specifics, but there are, unfortunately, and then I'm not even talking about professional tenants that go into these homes and they pull the wool over everybody's eyes. All of their credits look good, even their scores look good, their employment checks out, and then they go and they just squat, and they're
just taking advantage of the whole thing.
Advantage of the whole system.
So here's some stats for you, right? So as of mid 2023, landlords actually spent reported waiting 8 to 12 months for an eviction hearing, and some cases even exceeding a year. And then pre-pandemic, average eviction timeline was 2 to 3 months. Now it's 8 months plus due to the backlog you're talking about. And then crazy over like last year, there's about 50,000 cases that are pending.
53,000.
53,000 now, right?
As of February, there's an article which I was quoting here as well. And I love this article too, is as well, sometimes the hearings are, the The LGBT estimates the average application for non-payment for rent is scheduled for a hearing is roughly 3 months. Where and what world are these people living in? Down from an estimated 10 months in 2023. Bullshit. That number is totally skewed. And then it goes on, the article says, well, that's not the same for everybody. I have not ran into one single landlord that has had a hearing within 3 months. The only time I had a close case was that, I don't know if I have told you this story before, but this is talking about evicting a tenant who was taking advantage of the system. It was a couple of years ago. I had a tenant. She's out of town. She lives in Winnipeg, and the lady's in her 80s. Actually, she had an AVM. You know how my brain had an AVM? She also had an AVM, but it was affecting her, and she was literally dying. Had to go to like a palliative of care, and in order to pay for the palliative of care and for the long-term facility, as she's deteriorating, she had this condo which she was rented. Only lived a short period of time in the condo, and then had to leave because of this condition. Years, like maybe 5 or 10 years. So she had to go to Winnipeg because that's where the treatments were, right? And it prolonged her life for a certain period of time, but then her pension, everything started to run out. So now when they're moving into this long-term care, they're like, well, the only way that she could facilitate this change and this hospitalization was in order for her to sell, right? And they had, we had a property manager was not great. I don't even know why they had this person tenant in there. I don't think he really qualified. But anyway, I've talked with her and we went to go see the property, and I talked to the tenant. I said, hey, like, here's the situation. Your landlord is actually dying. We need to catch. Okay, do you need help? We will give you a lot of time in order to move. How many and I went to go see the property. Owen,
it's trashed, eh?
Oh my God. He had carpet, the floors were wet. He had like dog pee and stuff everywhere. It was the amount of disgustingness in like this 700 square foot condo. I almost threw up. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
So I went back to the client. I said, okay, well, I'm going to try to clean as much as I can, but here's.
So you brought your own cleaning crew?
Always.
Yeah,
we always bring. So I said, well, we have to figure out a time, figure out timing. We'll said, I'll send my cleaners there and we'll do pictures right away because this guy's an absolute disaster. So we can't even give him like a day because he'll make the place look like crap. Wouldn't even take him that long. Like my cleaning crew was there for like 10 hours cleaning the crap out of this, and they were coming. They were not happy with me, to say the least. Like, what?
Like, what did you bring us to?
What are you bringing us to?
Yeah.
Right? And so he's already devaluing the property. Like, he basically was breaking stuff. It was not looking great. And we literally went in, like, they went in the morning. We did pictures and video afterwards. It was so bad that we walked in and it's like they didn't clean a thing. He had messed up, put everything back on the counters, like made a mess of the place. And I'm like, so I said to Adam, Adam does Vision 360, does all my videos. I'm like, Adam, what do I do? He goes, well, we can't really take videos inside. So we came up with a plan in which we took pictures, like stills. We were cleaning as much as putting things back as much as we could in this disgusting place. Poor Julia was with me as well, my old assistant, my old realtor. And so we were sitting there, and poor thing. So we did videos in the front of it, and then we did at the end and like in the lobby and stuff. But we did some virtual staging, like pictures and stuff, because we said this is what it could look. It's the only thing we could do. Anyway, it just tells you like of the mentality of this guy, right? And again, so we had it on the market, and we're like, listen, like, so we were constant conversation. Like before, it took about a month to even get the house on the market. And I said, do you need help? Oh, I'll find something later. I'll find something. Don't worry about it. I said, Julia can help you find a place. And he kept pushing us off. Well, we finally got 2 offers, and we accepted an offer, right? And it was conditional, blah, blah, blah. And because he knew this was coming, I said, well, we gave him more than 2 months. We signed an N12. Now, the difference between, an N11. We signed an N11. An N12, which we could have signed an N12, but an N12 means basically it's that the new owners coming into a property are taking possession of the property. That's the only way you technically can get a tenant out, but you really do need to move in. You can't use an N12 and then give it to the tenant, give them 60 days notice since the first of the month, so it's more than 60 days. So for example, say you come to an agreement on the 23rd, and there's 30 days of the month, you have to give it the first. So you have to give 60 days as of the first of the month. So you get the 60 days plus the 23rd to the 30th is 7. So you get 37 days. We didn't do that. Instead, I said, we came up with an N11. An N11 means both sides agree right, to end the tenancy. And he signed it. We were saying, okay, like here, you got more. We actually gave him more than 2 months, but it wasn't for the first month. It was something on the 22nd, but he had like 2.5 months. He still didn't find a place. And we're like, so I would call him, say, hey, find a place. And then all of a sudden, so we're supposed to close in June. Now, remember, this was 2023. This was when the rates were going up. So these buyers already had a pre-approval rate going into this market. So they needed to have a firm agreement at a certain point. And so I hope this story doesn't take too long, but it's like it tells you with the mentality of people what they can do. So and also the numbers, right? So a week or 2 weeks before closing, he's like, oh, my dad died in Iran. I can't move out. Can we extend it by an extra 2 weeks? And I said, well, let me talk to the buyers because they have a certain date. They can't pass it. I'm like, I'll see if it works for them.
He's actually like telling the truth. Like he's not.
I don't know. I don't think he's mad.
People use death as a way to extend.
Sorry, I've had to use a number of times.
Yeah.
And when people say death, I'm like, I'm almost going to start asking for death certificates because this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
So we extended it to June the 3rd or 4th, I think it was, because the June 5th we extended to, but I gave him the N11 a day or two before, just in case it was going to take this guy a little bit to come out. It was the 4th of July 4th. Sure enough, July 3rd, he's like, I'm not moving. He messaged me. He goes, oh, my mom was so distraught my mom was so distraught from my dad dying that now she's moved. She was in the hospital. And if I move her, like now she's back with me. The doctor said she can die. I'm like, first of all, she's not supposed to be living in your property. She's not a legal tenant.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can I see the doctor's notes or something? Like I just couldn't believe them. Right. And during this time, we already started the eviction process. Right. So anyway, long story short, we finally sent them, like I had hired somebody to get that, and we end up getting a hearing, and he squatted until August 31st. And I kept asking him every single time, like, what do you want? There's a whole thing for cash for keys. Do you want 1 month's rent back? Do you want, like, if you give an N12, you usually have to give your last month's rent, right? That's the rule. But I'm like, well, how many months rent do you have? And he had stopped paying. So he was already in arrears by 2 months and causing all this. We're supposed to have a hearing on September the 1st. So, sorry, I forgot to say that. So we gave him the notice and then for the hearing, and then, for him to be locked out. And once that happens, they have 10 days in order to rebuttal, right?
Yeah.
So the sheriff after that, he signed an N11. He understands that this tenancy was done, and he's refusing to move. So basically, you're in a trespass situation, right? A squatting situation. So we were able, because we signed the right paperwork, I paid the $250 online to get it expedited. And the landlord-tenant board said, sure, go ahead. You can have him evicted, but you have to give him 10 days of notice until he's evicted, till you change the locks, until you've actually evicted him out, in order for him to either pay or in order for him to rebuttal against it. Of course, on the 9th day, he hired a lawyer. And they said, we'll see you in court. And I'm like, what do you mean we'll see you in court? You've agreed to this.
Yeah.
So we've done everything correctly at this point. He signed two N11s to be out of the place. He had, at this point, 4 months to look for a property.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, the property manager had found him another place to live, but it was a little more expensive. Of course, because he was paying bottom rates because he was there for a number of years, right? So anyway, long story short, and then right before the hearing, he goes, fine, I'll take 4 months rent. So we had to pay him. And then I had to go into that disgusting apartment. I said, listen, because my client was out of town, I'm like, I will pay him the check, but I am not leaving until I see you actually out of the house. I never once saw his mother. He had all his buddies over. The house was still a piece of shit. This condo was a piece of shit when he's left. Like there was shit everywhere, excuse my language, but there was stuff everywhere. Like the stuff that was coming out, it was, ugh. Anyway, we finally got it, but it also cost because we had to keep extending, in the long run, it cost my client, which we only paid, like, the condo was like $520,000. We had to I think we had to give back to the buyers between $16,000 or $20,000 because of the extensions. Because every time because if the seller can't close, which side can't close, they have to pay the other side, right?
It's like it's your fault.
And it's your fault.
Yeah.
And then if we don't close, we could have got sued because of this tenant. Even though we gave him all ample opportunity. And this is not a unique situation, guys. This is happening. And he had stopped paying for a while.
Yeah.
But we finally, just to get him, so it cost my client the 4 months, plus all this headache and stuff. And then an extra $20,000 on top of that.
Wow.
But we closed.
There's so many ways I can go about this, because typically, like when you think about evicting people, there should be some process where you can actually use like brute force. Like there should be like a unit which comes and says, get the hell out. You know, like how, like, let's say ICE, they come and like take you, deport you or whatever. There's like an enforcement period that's needed to get people out. Like, why are we so lenient on things like this when it's my property? I gave it to you to rent.
Yeah.
You're not paying me because it's a transaction. It's business. Why are we not protecting these
Well, I had
landlords?
another client. He wanted to move in person. She didn't believe him. She goes, no. And she goes, I'm still paying rent. She continued to pay him rent. She's like, I'm not moving. She was just squatting. I'm like, I'm not moving. And she was they're going through the courts. He tried to get her out, and no, like, and even the courts are like, no, like, he's like, but I want to move in personally. He'd got a divorce.
It's my house.
They wouldn't even let him move in personally.
I've seen a service, sorry to interrupt, but I've seen a service where they hire someone else
Yeah.
to go move in with them.
Interesting.
Say it's like a white guy.
Yeah.
They'll hire like a big black guy with like dreads, and he goes like with his bags.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, like I live here too now.
Wow.
So what Isaac was saying, there's people that they get hired to fake to move in with somebody, and it's like somebody with a big boy to come and move in there with a scary. And listen, I've heard of stories where a landlord's gone in the middle of winter, the guy wasn't paying, and he removed all the doors and the windows. It's my house. Mm-hmm. They're like complaining. I'm like, it's my house.
My crib. Find a way.
You want to call the cops? Great, call the cops. Tell them you're not paying. I'm like, I'm not a place. I'm like, go to the landlord-tenant board and see how long it takes them to come out here to see. Like, in the meantime, you're going to freeze.
Damn, that's so.
But you got to be able to you'd be willing to ruin your own property, you know. But that's what he did. He's like, screw it. He's like, and he's a big boy too. So it's like, yeah, he's a little crazy. Yeah. So I love him. I've known him since high school, but I wouldn't put anything about it. That guy, you must pay. he's got some good connections.
Question for you: do you find that after COVID, because people like in COVID were going through like a lot of financial stress?
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of opened up that feeling of, okay, we can get away with this. Let's look at the laws and what is actually available.
I believe so. Yeah.
And then it expedited the entire thing. Now it's exposed the entire
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think COVID messed with the whole system. I think a lot of times people are at home, they try to figure out like, well, I don't want to move. I don't want to leave in because COVID, like a lot of people are just moving out of the units and they learn how to exploit it. And then other people, because COVID also had an effect on rents, right? So rents had dropped dramatically because most people weren't needing to live down or work downtown. They didn't need to be in those condos. And there was the vacancy rate skyrocketed. Therefore, the rental rate plummeted. When the rental rate plummeted, and then at that point, then you have, I would say fixed rates at some of these properties. Then they just go, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. And then if the landlord tried to put through some higher rent, they figured out how to skirt around it and pay zero rent. Honestly, these people, I don't know. As a Christian, I can't believe you're screwing people over like that anyway, just for your own selfish gain.
Yeah.
But we don't live in a Christian world. We don't. We know that.
Yeah.
And I can see how people just try to take advantage. It's always about me, me, me. Now I feel bad for we literally have clients that they can't pay the rent. Sorry, they can't pay the mortgage because rent's not coming in. So we explain that to the tenant, like, you need to pay, otherwise both of us are going to be out of a house. They don't care. It's like, foreclose on your mortgage. They don't care. We don't care. And that's happening.
They're buying time.
They're buying time. They're like, you're screwing me over. And so there's got to be some sort of law where I can show them they actually can't afford to keep this property afloat without this rent. And there's no backlash to that. It's like the tenants have all the rights, and we're seeing it a lot now in real estate as a realtor. Like, my investing clients are like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. Like, a lot of them are just like, either want to get out. The ones that have them, like, okay, fine, we're just going to keep these ones. We're not buying more. And in the beginning, they had an idea to buy a bunch. Well, the numbers have also changed on that. But a lot of it, they're like, I've heard these horror stories. In the past, I would always give an option to somebody. Like, I always say, don't sell your house unless you have to, right? You can always if you can turn it into a rental, make some money. And we'll sometimes run the numbers. Majority of the time, nowadays, people don't even want to run the numbers for rentals. They don't even care. If you have a condo, for example, you bought a condo as you're a young guy, you have one bedroom plus den, you're downtown core. I want to I met my girlfriend, we're going to get married, we want to buy a house, she has a condo. We want to, instead of using one as a rental, because one bedroom plus den is probably the best rental you have, best bang for your buck, especially in the downtown core. And you can get good rents and, only one person. Well, you can turn that into a great investment, but it's only a great investment if your tenant's paying.
Yeah.
And because the horror stories are like, I don't even want to deal with that. I'm hearing about this over. And it's been creeping up more and more since COVID, to the point now it's most of my clients, the ones that are would-be investors, they're not even budging. They're not even thinking of buying investment properties. And the funny thing is now is a great time to actually buy an investment property. I was talking to Amy Gilmore the other day, friend of the show, and we love Amy. And Amy was saying too, and we were talking about how things have changed and how she's got a bunch of condos for sale. And she's like, Dave, I read a stat that 70% of the listings in Toronto proper, like Toronto, like, you know, like
not Vaughan, not Mississauga.
Not Mississauga, not Vaughan, exactly. In Toronto, not GTA.
Yeah.
70% of them are condos. 70%. And I'm like, damn, you know, that's, you know, that, and I'm seeing it like even my condo townhouse, we had it sold conditionally and then the buyers backed out like for financing. I think we just got cold feet. Condos are hard to move. And I have a number of them coming up, but you know, there are some ones that are moving. But even Natalie was telling me too that she has a lot of condos coming up for sale. And I think majority of them used to be rentals. Majority of them.
And this is where I'm curious to get your opinion, because when I was looking at it, when you have a condo that you're renting out, and let's say someone wants to move out, I always felt like the landlord had all the advantage, because in a place like Toronto, it's easy to pick up another tenant because there's so much demand. But now I'm realizing that it's actually a 50-50 split, because if a landlord has a good tenant, they might take like the maybe extra $200 cut to keep a good tenant for the outlier of finding someone bad and then finding this situation, because I'm not exposed to the situation until I did more research on it. So now it's making sense. Do you feel like landlords are actually keeping that thought in mind of like,
I do all the time. I have good tenants. I barely, you know, I don't increase the rent every year.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm like, if you're good and the cohesionness of the family. So I'm talking about one of my properties is a 6. Actually, most of my properties I don't do like there's some that I need to, especially the ones I rented COVID, so I had to bump up. But for example, we have that 6-plex I have in Roncy we've talked about in the past. Like they work as a family. Like I only pick people in that house that goes well with everybody. There's good cohesion. So in order for me to just keep bumping rent to get somebody else so I get more money, might mess with, you know, with the mojo of the property. So I'm very cognizant of who I put in there. And if you don't give me problems, you know, I'm not going to raise your rent. If you're constantly asking me stuff, sure, I'm going to bump up your rent. But you know, when I usually rent my own properties, I get to meet them in person first, and you kind of get a feel for them. Who they are.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate thing with when you're using Realtor. Sometimes, like you don't always get to meet them, and we try to do like a Zoom call with most of potential tenants if they have time. Like we would just want to have like a quick meeting after we look at the stats and seeing if they are who they are and how they interact. Because it's a lot of times you can't meet in person, but you know, a Zoom call, you know, may suffice. Yeah. And we find that goes well. But again, you want to feel the person out, right? That's just kind of how it is. So
yeah, it is. It's actually something it came to me because I'm like, if I have all the power, it's my property. I can just get someone out, especially with we're going to talk about in our episode this in the next couple of weeks in rent control. I can just kick this guy out and bump up the rent. Yeah. But even if you do that, and now if you get a tenant in there, they might look like a professional. You might get someone who doesn't fit the quote unquote professional type, and they might be a great tenant for you. And then you have the professional person who could be someone who just messes up your, so you don't even know what to expect.
I just had this conversation with the team yesterday, and a lot of my teammates, like the newer guys, they do a lot of releases, and that's just, it's great. It's a good way to get your foot in the wall.
Yeah.
And I said this over and over again. It's like, you have to tell the whole story when it comes to looking at a tenant. It's not just, oh, I need a good credit score, good job, and I can afford to pay. I've leased out properties with people that had terrible credit. And I said, be careful, because the people with great credit, they feel like they can go anywhere because they have credit. They can go in, and some of the biggest assholes we had astounding scores.
Like 900.
So Mike Austin, remember, did we tell you about that story? Remember Mike was here?
Yeah.
And we talked about some of the tenants where he had it was kind of like Dexter. Like, remember, like those people had a 900 score.
Yeah.
But the thing is, because he wanted to take over and sell the property, they were such assholes because they know they can go anywhere and get any place they want. Now, if you get a tenant that has like a terrible score and you've done them a favor, like, listen, we understand, and as long as you give me a story, if you tell me a story why your credit is terrible, If you can back it up by with a good job and you have other stuff and you've been working on your credit, that makes more sense to me than going for somebody just like amazing credit who's never really had any adversity. Because I know the person with bad credit is trying to build on their credit. They're not going to want to set themselves back, right?
Yeah.
Because they've already hit the rock
They're already
bottom.
in pain. Right?
They're already in pain. So they're going to bend over backwards to make sure that they're a good tenant.
Yeah.
So I always say, like, new landlords, don't always shy away from somebody that has terrible credit. Now, if somebody has terrible credit and they're not doing anything to fix it, then it's an issue, right? But if they have a story and if you can show that they've been working on the credit and they have some cash, these are great. These could be potential great tenants for you. And because you've helped them, they in response will help you. We talked about the transgender tenant I had. And I remember I had a conversation with him when he was saying to me, like, he was so grateful for me leasing out the property to him. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you got scored, and like, you're giving me like 6 months up front or almost a year. Like, he goes, you don't understand. Some landlords, because I'm transgender, won't even look at me. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're still paying, you're still giving. Like, he was a good person, right? He like, once in a while, like, everyone has issues in the home, and he would talk like, we figure it out. But it was like, but majority of the time, like 98% of the time, 99% of the time, he was a fantastic tenant. Sometimes he couldn't pay, and he would say to me, I'm like, okay, like, because there was things, and I knew about his situation. So, but I have a heart, right? So he'd call me and say, Dave, I'm getting paid this. I had this setback. Is it okay if I make a payment plan like such? I said, yes. He's like, he couldn't believe it. So he ended up getting a fiance. So him and his fiance moved out. But he called me after he left, and he's like, I just have to tell you that I've never had anybody treat me that way. And I was like, as a landlord, what are you talking about? He goes, you treat me like a human being. Like, you help me. Like, you help me get to where I'm going because that's why we do this stuff, right? Sure, the money's good and all stuff too. But I always say too, like, if you're in real estate and you're only doing it for the money, and you're not going to last long, and people see you through that. When it comes to my tenants, I'm not a slumlord. If you have a problem, I try to fix it as fast as we possibly can, right? We just try to do that because I said to my tenants, I want to feel as if I was going to live in here. So if you have an issue, so try to get to it as quick as possible. I don't wait. And some landlord, like my dad was a little more of a slumlord. He would just put Band-Aids on things and things get bad. It would just get worse. If you put a Band-Aid on stuff, you're only fixing it temporarily. And it's going to cost you more money in the long run. But that goes with people as well, right? Like, making sure, like, work on the relationship of the ones that you have with your tenant. Your tenant could be a fantastic tenant if you just help them, right? And just, that way. It should not be a battle, landlord versus tenant, banging heads.
Yeah.
There should be like some cohesion, like, between the two. Like, it's a relationship. And
Yeah.
that's like any other relationship. There should be some good communication. And that goes with landlord tenants all the time.
Last question as we work towards wrapping up. One thing a lot of landlords are opting to do is make their properties into short-term rentals like Airbnbs and et cetera like that. Are you seeing that happening within the GTA where
can't now?
Can't.
And it's and the rules, because since of COVID, and they realized how many Airbnbs were out there, and that's why the condo market got decimated. So if you didn't know, back the rules for Airbnb used to be, you didn't have to be a principal residence. You could have, had a rental property and turned it as an Airbnb. But what happened with COVID, there were people, my brother-in-law was telling me, he had a friend of his, he had 40 units, which he had as Airbnb, and did not own one of them. He rented out 40 units and then had them on like a sub-market, right? And as an Airbnb. So when everybody got shot down, he screwed over 40 landlords. 40, right? So you can see the issue, right? Of course, the landlord can't pay, it became an issue. So Airbnb stepped up, like, we can't do that. Now they're saying, unless you own the unit, you have to have proof of ownership. And now the rules are even harder, that you need to have the Airbnb as your principal residence. You need to live there. So now the rules are kind of hard. So, but then they also make the rules harder. Like, I have a client, they bought a property down the street over here, not too far from here, and their basement's always been an Airbnb. But I think I told this story or not, but their Airbnb license got revoked for like 6 months because on the deed, it had the wife's name first and then the husband. But on the Airbnb application, it had the husband's name first and then the wife. Because their names are reversed, they denied them that and had to reapply again. So they were going to Airbnb and they're like, oh, they revoked their license. So now they're looking for ways for people to not do Airbnb. I just find it, and now it's going worldwide too. So Airbnbs, unfortunately, are not a viable solution for most people because it's your principal residence. Unless you're traveling a lot, like you're gonna get up and leave, or you're gonna share your you're gonna share your 1-bedroom condo with somebody. Like, I got to make some money. My turn to use the bathroom. All right, it's gonna be like Sheldon. It's gonna be like Sheldon. Like, oh, your bowel movement's supposed to be at 7. I'm supposed to come in at 7:30. You're past your time. Like, so I'm also finding that a lot of people that in the past Airbnbs, that's why also there was a lot of units that hit the market because they could no longer be Airbnbs and they couldn't afford to keep them as rentals, so they're not for sale. So there's been a lot of situations which renters have screwed over people. Like that situation where the guy had 40 units. All the unit holders, all the landlords thought he was moving in personally.
There's so much I can go deeper into that, but we're coming short on time. But to wrap it up, last question. For landlords who are looking to mitigate the risk of having bad tenants, give us a couple pointers of what they could do just so they can be sorted moving forward and not deal with a situation where someone's squatting in their property. Great
question, Owen. So the first thing you always do is, like, if you're working with a realtor, that's always good too, because usually the realtor on the tenant is also hopefully vetting their side.
Yeah.
And if you're using, obviously you're the landlord using your realtor as well. You want at least a couple sets of eyes on it. So for us, at least my assistant, I send it to her. She does all the background checks, and I also send it to the landlord. You should do your own background checks too to make sure you're happy with everything what's going on here. And what you always ask for, like a credit report. You do want to see the history of the credit. Like I said, there might be a story behind that, but just you want to see the credit report, and you also you want to see that there's no pages missing. Lori just fired a client yesterday because the client had sent her an Equifax, in which, first off, he had his buddy doctor it because he didn't want to show all the payments. He was missing 15 to 20 pages. So fired right away. The second thing is he changed his credit score. They photoshopped that. And because the number was it was supposed to be 700, it was close to the middle. It should have been close to the side. In the beginning, you just look at it, like you don't realize it. But anyway, so look at the document. So credit report, actually analyze Equifax. The second thing that I would always say is ask, and because when they sign an application to rent, if you're using a realtor, the applicant will sign the bottom. My office can run their own Equifax to make sure that what you sent to us is the same as what you're telling us, what you gave to us. So what the Equifax we have is the same as the one you sent to us. Anything there's any discrepancy between the two, red flag. Third, employment letter. Look at the employment letter, look at the numbers they've given on here, but Google the company. Make sure the numbers are the same. If not, call the number that you Googled and see if that person exists. Simple, right? So Owen, you can tell me like, oh yeah, I work with Isaac at IBM, but IBM's number is Isaac's number, right? But if I Google it, I'm like, I'm not calling Isaac's number. I'm calling IBM to see if Isaac actually exists.
Where the secretary picks up, then transfer to Isaac, and then talk to Isaac and see.
And the third thing you want to see, obviously, you want to see bank statements, and you also want to see if they're obviously an employee, you want to see their pay stubs. You want to see how the pay stubs go into the bank account and what they're doing with those fees, right? So again, they can scratch out all of their personal information. That's fine, but you want to see those numbers. So those are the pointers we give you. And then obviously the last one is, if you can, do a Zoom call with them, have a conversation with the tenant and landlord together, and have them ask the same questions that they said on there. See if their story checks out.
Amazing tips, DC. If you are a landlord and you're looking to get the best tenants in your property, you know who to hit up, Mr. Chinelli over here. Hit him up at Instagram, davidvchinelli_realtor, or you can email him, dchinelli@royallepage.ca. All the information will be here in the bio on YouTube. And we'll see you next week for an episode with Mary Jo and Murray. It should be a great one. And we'll see you guys next week. Peace out.